"Then I choose Miss Cecily Fairbourne," the Duke said, his gloved hand closing around her sister's fingers before Cecily's veil had stopped trembling. The ring cushion waited between them, fat with untouched gold. In St. Anselm's crowded nave, Cecily stood in bridal white and understood that the man promised to her since infancy had believed a letter she had never written. The vicar could not marry anyone. The special license named only Cecily Fairbourne, and that one hard legal fact kept her shame alive long enough to become evidence. The stone floor gave its damp chill through the thin soles of her slippers. 400 guests held their breath. Their silence was not empty. It pressed against her ribs. Cecily did not weep. Weeping was for women with a safe place to fall. She looked at Edmund Ainsley, Duke of Harrowmere. He did not look back. His profile might have been carved from the same pale stone as the old tombs beneath the church. He held Rosalie's hand with the fixed calm of a man signing away a debt. Her younger half-sister looked frightened. Rosalie's knuckles had gone white inside his grip. Her lips parted once as if she might speak, but no sound came. She did not pull away. In the first pew, Lady Viola Fairbourne lowered her head and lifted a lace handkerchief to her eyes. It was a flawless pantomime of maternal shock. Cecily had seen the performance before, though never with so many witnesses. Being promised, Cecily thought, is not the same as being chosen. Beneath the heavy silk of her bodice, a small gold ring hung on a blue ribbon against her collarbone. The cradle betrothal ring. It had been placed there when she was too young to close her fingers around it, sealing the settlement between the Fairbournes and the Ainsleys. All her life she had been told it was an honor. Now it felt like a brand.
"Your Grace," the vicar stammered. His prayer book shook in his hands.
"The license bears the name of the elder Miss Fairbourne. I cannot. The law does not permit a substitution at the altar." Edmund turned then. His dark eyes met Cecily's for the first time since he had shattered her life. There was no triumph in his gaze, only cold, absolute finality. "The elder Miss Fairbourne sent me a letter of release this morning," he said, his voice carried to the vaulted ceiling. "She stated her desire to be free of the obligation. I have merely honored her wish and secured the settlement through the remaining daughter." A letter. Cecily's breath hitched once. Only once. She had spent the morning kneeling in prayer, preparing to hand her future to a man she barely knew, but had been trained to revere. She had written no release. She had sent no servant. She had asked for nothing. The whispers began. A hiss of silk, a rustle of turning heads. Scandal swept the pews like wind through dead leaves. Cecily reached up with a steady hand. She unbuttoned her left glove at the wrist and pulled the white silk free finger by finger. Then she laid the empty glove on the velvet cushion beside the 2 gold bands that would not be worn that day. "Then the license has no bride," Cecily said. Her voice did not shake. It silenced the church more completely than a shout. She turned from the altar, from the Duke, from her trembling sister, and walked down the center aisle. Her chin stayed level, her shoulders stayed back. She did not look at the faces blurring past her. She looked only at the heavy oak doors at the end of the nave. She was leaving. But the forged letter followed her into the daylight. An hour later, the Duke's carriage, marked with the silver wolves of Harrowmere, drew into the courtyard of Fairbourne House. Edmund had sent it to carry Cecily home quietly, a supposed mercy. The sort of mercy powerful men offered when they wished a wound to bleed out of sight. The footman opened the door with his eyes lowered. Cecily stepped onto the gravel. She did not go to the side entrance used by servants and poor relations.
She climbed the wide stone steps and entered through the front doors. She would not hide like a shameful secret in the house where she had been born. Lady Viola waited in the drawing room, pacing before the unlit hearth. The lace handkerchief was gone. "You have ruined us," Lady Viola hissed, as soon as the doors closed. "You made His Grace's mercy difficult. You embarrassed him before the county." "He chose another woman at my wedding, madam," Cecily said, removing her veil. The pins scraped against her scalp.
I believe the embarrassment was mutual. He had your letter. I wrote no letter. Lady Viola's eyes sharpened. Do not lie to me. You were always too proud, too rigid, too certain of your place. You realized at last that you were unfit to be a duchess, and you panicked. Rosalie stepped in to save this family from the ruin you invited. Before Cecily could answer, the double doors opened. Edmund stood on the threshold. He filled the room without raising his voice, a dark figure against the pale wallpaper. The temperature seemed to drop. "Leave us, Lady Viola," he said. It was not a request. Viola curtsied with fury in every inch of the movement and swept from the room. At the door, she cast Cecily a look sharp enough to cut silk. Edmund came forward. From the inner pocket of his coat, he withdrew a folded sheet of paper and placed it on the low table between them. "Your release," he said. His voice had no inflection, a man reading a ledger. Cecily looked at the paper. She did not touch it. "I did not write it." "It is your hand. It is a clever imitation." She bent close enough to read the ink. The loops of the sea had been copied from her old copybooks. The slope of the lines nearly matched her own, but the phrasing betrayed it. "For the peace of the family." Her stomach tightened. Lady Viola used those words whenever Cecily was asked to surrender something her mother had left her. Her mother's rooms, her mother's jewels, her right to sit first at table. Always for peace. Always for Rosalie. Cecily straightened. "Did you truly believe, Your Grace, that I would break a lifelong settlement on the morning of my wedding with a single note delivered by a servant?" Edmund's jaw tightened. It was a tiny fracture in his terrifying control. "I believed you had recognized the gravity of what was before you. A loveless union bound by an old charter and old debts." "And Rosalie Cecily asked," her voice dropped. "Is that a union of profound affection?" He did not flinch. "It secures the Harrowmere line and satisfies the Fairbourne debts. Nothing more is required of her." He expected tears or pleading, perhaps some desperate bargain to reclaim the position he had taken from her. Cecily only looked at him. 3 years ago, he had buried his first wife and returned to society as a frozen monument of a man. He had not chosen Rosalie from love. He had chosen her because she seemed easier, lighter, less likely to ask anything of his heart. "You are a coward, Your Grace," Cecily said softly. Edmund went perfectly still. She walked to the window and looked out at the fading afternoon. "Keep the letter." "It appears you need its fiction more than I do." She did not see his hand twitch beside the table. She did not see the way his eyes lingered on the straight line of her back. He had expected a weeping girl. He had found a wall as unyielding as his own. By the next morning, Mr. Penhaligon, the family solicitor, had arrived at Harrowmere Abbey with road dust on his coat and the cold reality of the law in his leather satchel. "The settlement cannot simply be transferred," he explained in the Abbey library. Cecily sat in a high-backed leather chair with her hands folded in her lap. She had been summoned to the Abbey along with Lady Viola and Rosalie. Until the legal matter was settled, The Duke had insisted the Fairbourne women remain under his roof. It was protection, in the language of authority. It still felt like captivity. Mr. Penhaligon adjusted his spectacles and tapped a thick parchment. The original charter of 1792 ties the Fairbourne Parish School Fund and the chapel maintenance to the elder daughter's dowry. If His Grace marries the younger Miss Fairbourne without a witnessed dissolution of the first contract, the trustees may withhold the funds and place the matter before the ecclesiastical court.
Edmund stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames. Then prepare the dissolution. It will take several days to verify signatures and secure a new license, Penhaligon warned. Until then, Miss Cecily's rights remain intact. Lady Viola gave a sharp sigh. Rosalie sat beside her in a new silk gown, bought on credit against a title not yet hers. She looked like a child, dressed for a play she did not understand. "What of the school?" Cecily asked. The room paused. "The winter quarter begins next week," she continued. "The coal merchant has not been paid." Rosalie blinked. "A school? I thought the village children worked in the mills." Edmund turned from the fire. Cecily did not look at her sister. "My mother founded the parish school. It is supported by the estate. The ledger requires the Duke's seal, or the funds cannot be released." "Surely such trifles can wait," Lady Viola snapped. "We are discussing a dukedom." "I'm discussing 30 children who will freeze if the stove is not lit by Monday," Cecily replied. Her tone was perfectly even. That made the words strike harder. She looked at Edmund. "If I'm to remain a guest in this house while you dismantle my future, I ask permission to inspect the schoolroom. It is my right under the settlement you have not yet broken." Edmund studied her. She asked nothing for herself. No apology, no reinstatement. Only the work she had been raised to do, and never praised for doing. "You may have the carriage," he said slowly, "and access to the ledgers." Cecily inclined her head. "Thank you." As she rose, the clasp at her collar shifted. For one breath, Edmund saw a flash of blue ribbon against her skin. The betrothal ribbon. She still wore it. Not as a plea, he realized, as a record. As proof that something had been taken, whether he chose to name it or not. He watched her leave the library. The silence after her departure felt less like quiet than accusation. The parish schoolroom smelled of damp chalk, cold ash, and old wood. Cecily knelt on the uneven boards and sorted cracked slates into two piles, those that could be mended and those that must be replaced. The cold here was not grand or poetic. It was practical. It bit the fingers and numbed the toes and made children write badly because their hands shook. She pulled the school ledger from the bottom drawer of the master's desk. The brown leather cover was worn soft at the corners. This had been her mother's work. It was the only duty left to Cecily that had not yet been dressed up as a favor and given away. If Lady Viola secured the dukedom for Rosalie, the school would be closed within a month. New gowns in London would eat the coal fund first, then the books, then the teachers' wages, and no one in a drawing room would say the word theft. The door creaked open. Cecily did not look up. "The April entries are missing from the chapel book, Mr. Hodges. I shall need them before the audit." "I am not Mr. Hodges." She closed the ledger and rose, smoothing the skirts of her plain wool morning dress. Edmund stood in the doorway. His riding coat was dark with frost at the shoulders. His boots were dusted with mud. He looked entirely out of place among the small, battered desks. "Your Grace," she said, offering the least courtesy allowed. "The carriage horses were restless. I rode out." His gaze swept the room, and stopped on the black iron stove. "It is freezing in here. It is winter. And there is no fire. The coal has not been delivered." He walked to the stove and touched the metal. His mouth tightened. "I assumed the steward handled such matters." "The steward handles what he is ordered to handle. A duke's attention is required for the rest." She moved to the window and pushed a folded scrap of cloth into a gap beside the latch. The wind stopped whining through it. Edmund watched her hands. They were red from cold but steady. She belonged in this room more completely than she had belonged in bridal silk. In the church he had seen a woman placed before him like an obligation. Here, he saw the shape of her life. "You corrected the chapel dates in the registry," he said, nodding toward the open book. "The vicar forgets the leap years. Rosalie did not know the school existed. Rosalie was raised to be an ornament in a drawing room. I was raised to manage the estate she now expects to inherit." Cecily closed the ledger. "Is there something you require, Your Grace? Or did you ride out only to observe my humiliation in a colder setting?" Edmund flinched. The movement was so small, most people would have missed it. "I received a note from your stepmother this morning," he said. "She suggests that given the awkwardness, you may prefer to be sent to an aunt in Bath, with a modest allowance." Cecily's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. Bath. Exile. Lady Viola was trying to erase her before the new license could be signed. "And what did you reply?" she asked. "I replied that you are under my roof, and you will leave it only when you choose to." The words should have felt like rescue. Instead, they frightened her. A man with his power could make even kindness feel like a door closing. He seemed to understand because he did not step nearer. His gloved hand rested on the back of a child's chair, careful not to touch her ledger. "Why did you not fight for it at the altar, Cecily?" he asked quietly. Her name without the miss changed the air. "Why lay down your glove and walk away?" She looked at his hand on the small chair. He could command rooms, servants, horses, solicitors. He could silence Viola with a sentence. But he had not known what to do with a woman who would not beg. "Because you did not want me," Cecily said. "And I will not force a man to honor a vow he regrets before it is even spoken." She picked up the ledger and walked past him. That afternoon, 2 carts of high-grade coal arrived at the school, along with new glass for the cracked western pane and a bundle of slates tied in twine. The carter said the order bore the Duke's seal. Cecily watched the men unload from the window of her chamber at the Abbey. Coal was not an apology. Slates were not love. Still, her throat tightened. When she closed her eyes, she remembered the way Edmund had looked at her in the schoolroom. Not as a bride misplaced, not as a debt. As a woman who had been carrying weight while everyone else admired the ribbon that bound it. It was dangerous to be seen by a man who had already thrown her away. Dinner at Heromere Abbey was a battlefield disguised as good breeding. The table could seat 20. Only 4 places were set. Edmund sat at the head. Lady Viola and Rosalie sat to his right. Cecily sat on his left, an ocean of polished mahogany between them. "I have ordered the modiste from Bath," Lady Viola announced, cutting her meat with brisk, angry strokes. "Rosalie will need a proper trousseau. The garments prepared for Cecily are entirely the wrong temperament. Too plain," Mamma Rosalie said, offering Edmund a nervous smile. "A duchess ought to bring a little light into the Abbey, ought she not, Your Grace?" Her fork touched the porcelain with a thin, nervous click. She had eaten almost nothing. When Cecily's gaze shifted toward her, Rosalie looked down so quickly that one pearl trembled at her ear. Edmund looked at his wine. "The Abbey has been dark for 3 years, Miss Rosalie. Light is not easily bought in a shop." Rosalie's smile faltered.
Her fingers tightened around the fork until her glove wrinkled. Lady Viola gave a brittle laugh. Cecily is still behaving as if she were Duchess already, traipsing through mud to count slates. Such a grim little martyr. Edmund's hand stopped on the stem of his glass. He was about to speak. Cecily felt it. The room did too. One cold command from him would end the insult. But Cecily did not need to be rescued from a woman whose weapons she had survived since childhood. She folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate. Then she looked directly at her stepmother. "I am behaving like my mother's daughter," Cecily said. She did not believe a title existed so ladies might wear imported silk while tenants froze. "If that is martyrdom, madam, I wear it gladly." Lady Viola's face darkened. "You forget your place." "No," Cecily replied. Her gaze shifted to Edmund. "I am the only person at this table who remembers exactly what my place was meant to be." She stood. She did not ask to be excused. She left the dining room with her spine straight and her hands steady. As the door closed behind her, a soft sound followed. Not a sob. Not quite. Only Rosalie's breath, catching too hard, before Lady Viola's whisper cut it short. Edmund heard it. So did Cecily. Neither of them turned back. Edmund watched the closed door. The ice he had mistaken for discipline gave a sudden, violent crack. He looked at Rosalie, who stared down at her plate as if shame had been laid there among the silver. He looked at Lady Viola, already arranging her next calculation behind tight lips. They wanted his title. They wanted his wealth. They wanted the Abbey as a prize. Cecily wanted not to be erased. Later that evening, the corridors lay silent beneath the sconce light. Edmund walked the wing he usually avoided, the one that led toward the old nurseries and the locked gallery of family portraits. He found Cecily there. She stood at the end of the passage, returning a set of heavy iron keys to a hook on the wall. The school keys. A simple shawl covered her shoulders. Moonlight silvered the loose strands of hair at her temple. "You should not have left the table," Edmund said. Cecily did not startle. She finished hanging the keys before she turned. "I had lost my appetite. I did not wish to disturb yours." "You disturbed it the moment you placed that glove on the altar cushion." He came closer. The gallery was too quiet, too narrow. He was too near. But Cecily did not step back. "Why did you choose her, Edmund?" she asked. "No title, no shield?" "It was not love," she continued. "Do not insult my intelligence by pretending to sudden passion." Edmund looked down at her. The moonlight caught the wet shine in her eyes before the tears fell. He could lie. Aristocrats were trained for it. But the lie turned to ash in his mouth. "Eleanor," he said. His dead wife's name sounded strange in the air. He had not spoken it aloud in 3 years. Cecily went still. "She came from a quiet family," he said. His voice was low and rough. "She was gentle, obedient, willing to be shaped. I brought her here, and the weight of this house crushed her. The duties, the tenants, the expectation that she would become Harrowmere before she had learned how to breathe in it." He closed his eyes. "When I received that letter, and it said you wished to be free of the burden, I saw it happening again. Another woman trapped by a title, another life placed in my hands and broken there." His control cracked further with every word. "Rosalie would not feel the weight," he said. "That was what I told myself. She would wear the gowns and ignore the rest. But you would feel every stone, every name in every ledger, every child in that school." Cecily stared at him. The cold Duke was gone. In his place stood a man terrified of his own power, and more dangerous because his fear had worn the mask of mercy.
"You did not choose Rosalie because you trusted her to bear it," Cecily said. Her voice trembled for the first time. "You chose her because she asked nothing of your heart."
Edmund opened his eyes. The truth struck him plainly, cruelly. Cecily's own armor fractured in the same breath. The exhaustion of a lifetime of being arranged, trained, and thanked for obedience rose too fast to swallow.
"Do you know what it is to be promised?"
she asked. One tear slipped down her cheek. She let it remain there.
"Before I could speak, I was told I belonged to you. I was taught to wait, to prepare, to be grateful for a future no one asked whether I wanted."
Her fingers closed around the blue ribbon at her throat.
"And still," she whispered, "when you chose another woman, it hurt, as if I had chosen you first."
Edmund exhaled, as though the words had struck his chest.
He lifted his hand. His knuckles brushed the tear from her cheek, warm and unbearably gentle. Then his fingers hovered near the ribbon. He wanted to pull her to him. It was there in the tension of his body, in the breath he did not take. But he stopped. He let his hand fall and stepped back. He would not claim her in a dark corridor. He would not turn remorse into another demand. The restraint cost him. She saw that it did. For the first time, he paid something and asked nothing in return. "I was a fool," he said roughly. "I will not compound it by touching you when you have not invited it." Then he turned and walked away into the shadows. Cecily leaned against the cold stone wall, her heart pounding. He had not saved her. He had finally seen her.
The truce lasted 2 days. On the third morning, the storm broke. Cecily was in the library, tracing the old ink of the 1792 settlement ledger, when the door opened so hard it struck the paneling. Lady Viola marched in with a sealed document in one hand. Rosalie trailed behind her, not smug now, only pale. Her hands were clasped so tightly that the seams of her gloves strained. "Pack your trunks, Cecily," Lady Viola ordered. "The carriage leaves for Bath in an hour." Cecily set a silver marker between the pages. "I have not agreed to go to Bath." "You have no choice. The new license has been procured." Viola threw the document onto the table. "It will be read tomorrow at St. Anselm's. A small, private ceremony. You will not be there to cast your shadow over your sister's joy." "Tomorrow?" For one moment, the room narrowed around Cecily. She saw the trunk, the road, the aunt in Bath who would call exile prudence. She saw herself becoming an inconvenient footnote in Rosalie's new life. Then her hand found the ledger beneath her palm, and the panic became something colder. She turned to Rosalie. "Do you truly want this? A marriage built on a lie and a stolen right?" Rosalie lifted her chin, but the movement shook. "You are only angry because he did not want you. Mama says you are trying to steal him back. But he chose me." "He chose you," Cecily said, "because Mama threatened to send you to Lord Heatherset if you refused." Rosalie flinched, as if the name itself had struck her. "Enough!" Lady Viola snapped. "The footmen are coming for your trunks. She will leave when she decides to leave." Edmund stood in the doorway. He was dressed for riding, still gloved, his expression stripped of all courtly calm. He entered, and the air turned sharp. "You do not issue orders in my house, Lady Viola," he said. "Your Grace, surely you see it is for the best. Her presence is a disruption." "Her presence is a right!" He turned his back on Viola and looked at Cecily.
She saw the anger in him. Fierce. Protective. He could end this with one order. He could send Viola from the room, tear up the license, declare the wedding impossible, and leave Cecily nothing to do but be grateful. But he remembered the gallery. She saw him remember it. He stepped aside instead of stepping in front of her. "If you wish to leave, Cecily, I will not stop you," he said. "If you wish to stay, no one will force you out. And if you wish to speak,
I will make certain they hear you."
He had opened a door. He would not carry her through it.
Cecily looked at the forged release on the table. She looked at the new license.
Then her fingers moved to the ribbon at her throat. Slowly, she drew it from beneath her bodice and unfastened the clasp at the back of her neck. The ribbon was old, the blue silk frayed along one edge. As she turned it over, her thumb caught on a ridge of thread. Her mother had been meticulous. She had trusted needles more than clerks. There, stitched in tiny faded thread on the inner fold, was a date. September 14th, 1792. Cecily picked up the forged letter. On the second page, in the false hand that wore her name, the settlement was described as having been signed on the 12th of September, 2 days before it had existed. A mistake her mother would never have made. A mistake Cecily would never have made. She looked up at Edmund. He saw the answer in her face and said nothing. He did not take the ribbon. He did not take the proof. He waited. "I shall not need the carriage to Bath, madam,"
Cecily said to Lady Viola.
She closed her hand around the blue ribbon. "I require the carriage to St. Anselm's, tomorrow morning." St. Anselm's was not crowded this time. Lady Viola had kept the ceremony quiet. Only the immediate family, Mr. Penhaligon, the vicar, and a few necessary witnesses sat near the front. Morning light broke through the stained glass and laid red and sapphire bars across the stone floor. Rosalie stood at the altar in a pale pink gown. She looked ill. The flowers in her hands trembled faintly, though there was no wind inside the church. Edmund stood beside her in formal black, but he looked like a man walking to sentence. His eyes remained fixed on the heavy oak doors at the back of the nave. The vicar opened his prayer book. "Dearly beloved," the doors opened with a hard, echoing sound. Cecily walked in. She did not wear bridal white. She wore a plain cream mourning dress, her hair pinned without ornament. No veil softened her face. No bouquet filled her hands. She did not look like a discarded bride returning to plead. She looked like a woman who knew exactly who she was.
Lady Viola rose from the pew.
"What is the meaning of this? Stop her!" Edmund lifted one gloved hand. "Let her speak." He stepped away from Rosalie and turned toward Cecily. He did not come to her side. Not yet. He left the aisle open. Cecily walked past him to the altar. The velvet ring cushion sat on the pedestal exactly where it had waited a week before. The memory of her glove seemed to lie there still. Cecily reached into her pocket and drew out the blue ribbon with the cradle ring attached. She placed it on the cushion. Then she turned to the vicar and Mr. Penhaligon. "The new license is invalid," she said. "It rests upon a forged letter of release." "This is an outrage," Lady Viola cried. "The Duke himself accepted the letter." "I was mistaken," Edmund said. The church froze. He moved forward, not ahead of Cecily, but beside her. His voice was clear enough to reach the last pew. "I accepted a document without proof because I was blinded by my own fears. I wronged Miss Fairbourne at this altar. I allowed a falsehood to stand because it spared me the courage of asking what was true." He turned slightly toward Cecily, yielding the floor. She picked up the blue ribbon and held it out to Mr. Penhaligon. "The forged letter describes the settlement as signed on September the 12th, Cecily said.
The original settlement, as recorded in the chapel register and stitched into this ribbon by my mother's hand, was signed on September the 14th. I could not release a contract under a date on which it did not yet exist. Mr. Penhaligon leaned close, examined the stitching, then opened the register he had brought beneath his arm. His face changed. Cecily turned to her sister. Rosalie was trembling. Tears had begun to spill down her cheeks. "Rosalie," Cecily said, and the edge left her voice. "Did I write that letter?" Rosalie looked at Lady Viola. Viola's eyes flashed with warning. Then Rosalie looked at Cecily. Not at the bride she had replaced, at the sister who had just given her one chance to stop being used. For one awful moment, Rosalie's mouth opened, and no sound came. Her fingers crushed the flowers against her gown. "No," she sobbed at last. The word broke out of her as if it had been trapped there for days. "Mama made me copy your hand from an old exercise book. She said if I did not, Lord Heatherset would have me by Michaelmas." The silence that followed was total. Lady Viola sank back into the pew, white-faced. Mr. Penhaligon shut the register. "The second license cannot stand. The matter is closed." But for Cecily, the paper was not the ending. The ending was the sound of her own breath in that church, steady and alive, while no one could move her from the place where she stood. She turned to Edmund. He watched her with a vulnerability so open it seemed almost indecent in public. He stepped toward her, then stopped short of touching her. "You were promised to me by our families," he said. His voice was low, but the church carried it. "I failed that promise. I ask now only as a man who has learned too late that being promised is not being chosen." His gaze dropped to the gold ring on the cushion. He did not pick it up. He waited. Cecily's gaze moved from the ring to Rosalie, who stood weeping softly in the pew. Lady Viola sat beyond her, rigid and ruined, her power broken against the truth at last. Then Cecily returned her attention to Edmund. She cared for him. That truth rose quietly, without permission. It frightened her less than it might have a week ago, because it did not command her. But she would not be swept into a happy ending at the altar of her humiliation. She picked up the blue ribbon. She did not hand it to him. She curled it into her own palm. "Then ask me another day, Edmund," Cecily said. A faint, real smile touched her mouth. "When no one can mistake my answer for obedience." Warmth flared in his eyes. He bowed to her deeply, and with a reverence no old contract had ever given her. "I will wait as long as you require," he said. It took a month for the scandal to settle into history. Lady Viola was removed from the parish school trusteeship and lost all control of the Fairbourne settlement. She withdrew to London, where even old friends found reasons to be from home when she called. Rosalie was sent to live with a strict but kind aunt in Yorkshire. She left in tears, humbled and ashamed, but safe from her mother's bargains. Before she went, she sent Cecily a note in a careful hand. "I am sorry. I did not know how to be brave until you showed me." Cecily folded it and placed it in the school ledger, not as forgiveness yet, but as a beginning. The estate funds were unsealed. The school was warm. The cracked western pane had been replaced, and every child had a whole slate. One afternoon, Cecily sat at the master's desk after the pupils had gone home. Pale sun spilled through the windows. The room smelled of chalk, coal smoke, and clean wool drying near the stove. On the wall, the old key hook held the school keys. They no longer looked borrowed. The door opened. Edmund entered without his formal coat. He wore a plain riding jacket, his hair slightly windblown. He looked younger than he had in the church. Not less a duke,
but more a man. He came to the desk and stopped at the proper distance. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he placed the blue ribbon on the open ledger before her. The cradle ring had been removed. Beside the ribbon, he set a new gold band. Simple, elegant, untethered to any ancient charter debt or family bargain. "The records are in order," he said. "The school is funded. There are no settlements left to fulfill." Cecily studied the new ring, the folded ribbon.
And finally, the man who had returned both without claiming either.
"Are you asking, Your Grace?"
His mouth softened.
"I am begging, Miss Fairbourne. Freely, completely, and without condition."
He drew a breath.
"Will you choose me?"
Cecily did not answer at once. Not because she doubted him,
Because the silence was hers now. The choice was hers now. She let herself feel the weight of it, not as a chain, but as something placed carefully in her open hands. Then she reached past the ring and laid her hand over his. His fingers turned at once, linking with hers, holding tight. Warmth settled through her skin, steady and real. "Yes," Cecily said.
Their wedding 3 weeks later was not held in the vast nave of St. Anselm's. It was held in the small parish chapel, witnessed by the village tenants, the school children, and the few relatives who had learned to speak Cecily's name with respect. On the altar, beneath the new gold rings, the blue ribbon lay folded away. It was no longer proof of a promise made for her. It was the foundation of a choice made by her.